Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me from the Motor City, where he was there for the draft last night, Brian Murphy. First we got to get to your reaction, and then I want to hear a little more about what you did in Detroit. You are a Detroit native, and you watched a heck of a lot of JJ McCarthy in a run by Michigan football to a championship last year. So Brian Murphy, give it to me, man. What do you think about what happened last night?
Well, I think that was it. He seemed to be on their radar, McCarthy, for a long time here. It was fun to watch. I mean, to see six QBs taken in the first 12 picks. I mean, that I guess we shouldn't be shocked, but that was a hell of a run, a historic run. But to watch, um, you know, to watch the Falcons. I don't know what the Falcons are doing, but to watch the Falcons kind of cattle prod the Vikings into doing what they needed to do to secure JJ McCarthy was probably the most entertaining part of the draft last night. And, we all know, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was on the clock literally because his previous 2 years were underwhelming to say the least, managing the draft. Everybody knew this was a franchise defining moment, not just for him and Kevin O'Connell, but just for the Wilson in general. I mean, it's very rare that the Vikings ever target a quarterback in the first round, and it's very rare that they've never, I don't think, drafted top 10 before. Dante Culpepper, I think, was 11th in 1999. So we knew this was going to be sort of a franchise shape-shifting kind of a night, and it was interesting to see they were, Kwesi was not going to let McCarthy slip through his fingers, and if the Broncos had somehow outmaneuvered and found a way to leave the Vikings holding their hat in their hands at number 11, that would have been an unmitigated disaster. So they did what they had to do. I was impressed with how aggressive too they moved up and kind of broke against the grain and decided to get one of the best defensive players out there in Alabama edge rusher Dallas Turner. So they did what they had to do from a managerial and an expectation standpoint. Uh, did they overpay? Have they drained their draft capital? Yes, in some ways, but I don't know if that's something you need to be fretting about this morning. They are they are better positioned for the future than they were 24, 48 hours ago. And that kind of leaves us to all kinds of possibilities. It may not be a banner season in 2024, but it's certainly going to be a different season with a different set of expectations and personalities. And it's going to be interesting to see how they bring McCarthy into the fold.
The way that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah managed the draft board to me with a lot of patience, and I think I would have probably panicked if I were in his shoes. When you get to number 5, it was kind of out there that Arizona wanted Marvin Harrison Jr. They were going to stay, but in a draft with so many good offensive linemen, you could have seen number 5, the Chargers, saying, hey, we'll drop back. We'll draft an offensive lineman somewhere else rather than taking a lineman at number 5, that they would have been kind of the team to target there. And then you get to even number 7, another team that was taking a lineman, another team that could have traded back. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has a relationship with the GM of the Titans to not panic, to have a very good sense of nobody else is going to be able to get up there, or no one else is going to take that shot from behind us, and let it kind of come to him. Was very well played. It was a little risky. It was like kind of
Very risky.
going toward the edge, and you can't go over and be left without a quarterback here, and yet found a way to not give up major draft capital. And that was the key to last night, because every quarterback in my mind had a price that you would go, okay, all right, that's fine. If they gave up everything for Drake May, okay, that's fine. If they gave up a little for JJ McCarthy, they gave up almost nothing for JJ McCarthy. And then to just box out the Broncos and the Raiders to say, all right, we're going to make sure we're just going to move up that one spot and just make sure now that we're here on the doorstep. That was something, like you said, that was more of a veteran general manager managing the draft in the way that he did, as opposed to like what we saw in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's first draft. But that's why we shouldn't judge someone in their first year as a general manager. I think it was actually good for him to have this run up of a couple of seasons in the hot seat there, in a good way, as a GM, to be able to make this move.
Well, and I think that's what makes maybe the draft more attractive, exciting, and intriguing to watch, particularly the first night, first round, obviously. I mean, I've never been one to really dive into watching the draft and trying to figure out the machinations, because usually the Vikings are not in play for high level maneuvering like they were last night. Either they're shooting themselves in the foot by not getting a pick in time, they're trading back out, they're moving down, they're not as relevant. And then you're left kind of teeth gnashing and hand wringing about the whole thing. But to watch how the first 10 to 12 picks and how the teams maneuvered, and it's like you mentioned, I mean, it was as much about being aggressive to get McCarthy, but also being aggressive to watch your flank, because everybody knew the Broncos were hot for a quarterback. At 12, the Raiders were in the mix too. And then when the Falcons throw a monkey wrench into things by shocking the world and shocking Kirk Cousins to his well-compensated toes, I'm sure, then you're now looking at, the pressure is building, the clock is literally ticking, and you need to make sure that you have, measured, smart, aggressive, and also ultimately responsible decisions made in the draft room. And it looked like it was executed last night to perfection. Now, was this Kwesi's plan all along? Has this been a slow play to this moment? Because obviously the last couple of Aprils have been fairly underwhelming, save maybe for Jordan Addison. But I found it interesting that the Vikings didn't allow themselves to get boxed in, to overpay, and also get outmaneuvered. And I think that was as much of the story as it was who they got. It's how they got them and how they prevented others from getting them.
Yeah, and the strategizing also to go and get Dallas Turner, who was one of the elite prospects in the draft. No one would have been shocked at all if Dallas Turner had gone to the Atlanta Falcons. It was probably one of the most mocked draft picks out there during draft season, that everyone thought, all right, there'll probably be one defensive player to Atlanta, and that will go number 8. It'll probably be Dallas Turner, but a couple guys go off first, Leatu Latu and Byron Murphy, 2 very good prospects as well. And the Vikings decide this is a guy who's perfect for Brian Flores, which I think if you look at his resume, he runs a 4.46 as an edge rusher, which is pretty wild. But he also played 90 snaps last year in coverage. He's a versatile player. He's got all the tools to be a star. I mean, this just seems like fit is a huge part of Dallas Turner. But I want to go back to your reaction with JJ McCarthy specifically. One thing that I always warn against is trying to decide on draft night whether you like a quarterback or don't like a quarterback. But what is your feeling about him, knowing that there is some unknowns, the way that they played from Michigan? That was the word that Kwesi used, was unknowns. I think that's a good way to phrase it. But also somebody that has won a lot in his football career and has tools to be a franchise quarterback.
I mean, he's got a winning pedigree. That's obviously his largest asset, right? He was 27-1 as a starter, 15-0 last year with Michigan. Very accurate. I think his 72 plus percentage completion percentage was a school record. And Michigan hasn't necessarily been known as a quarterback factory, but that's 120 some years of football. He's the most accurate passer in the school's history. He's only 21, so he was the youngest of the first round quarterbacks. But you're right. I mean, Michigan was a run heavy, Jim Harbaugh, grind it out, old school pro style. Maybe I think he threw 20 to 25 passes a game. But, how do you overlook what he was able to accomplish as a leader? It's not easy to play at Michigan. It's not easy to be in that hothouse scrutiny. And he was able to beat Ohio State the last couple of years as well, which is, I mean, in Ann Arbor, I mean, you could be elected president for doing that. I think it's going to be, what I'm really going to be fascinated by is how the Vikings kind of frame in the next couple of months, what their expectations are for developing and allowing McCarthy to compete with Sam Darnold, not only in the offseason, but in training camp. Because look, you can easily go 4-13 with Sam Darnold next year, and I don't think anybody would be shocked. You can also go 4-13 with JJ McCarthy, but does that mean he's going to be getting beaten up and having his confidence chewed up? And facing, sort of a Christian Ponder in over his head expectation level? Or are they going to be able to, plug and play him and allow him to maybe get some battle scars and some experience in a rebuilding year? Now, the Vikings are never going to call this a rebuilding year, but, you got to look at the division with Green Bay and Detroit sort of ascending. Chicago is going to be building for a while, but it's not like the Vikings 9 wins are going to get you in anymore. So I'm going to see how they allow him to compete with Darnold. What are going to be the benchmarks for getting him starting snaps? What are the benchmarks for pulling the plug if they're 1-4 and Darnold's going nowhere? How are they going to both uh, allow McCarthy to grow into the role they want him to be without ruining him too soon? These are all the things that are now going to be fun to watch because, Kevin O'Connell's a quarterback guy. He's a quarterback guru. He played the position. McCarthy seems like, everything I've read, that he had great contact with him and great relationships inside the Vikings. So what are they going to want to do with him? So that's what I'm going to be looking for next. But I mean, I don't look at his diminished stats as, it's easy to have inflated stats that don't really get you anywhere. I think he's got some championship metal to him. He's got some thick skin. I mean, look, 27-1 for a huge college program is nothing to blink an eye at, even if he's only throwing 170 yards a game. What are the Vikings? They got Aaron Jones. They obviously have some offensive pieces in place. He may be in a position to develop because of those around him that can help make him better, as opposed to the burden being on him to make everyone else better.
But as you mentioned, it is important, that they kept the first round pick for next year, by the way, because that might be a fairly high pick. And it is really important also that they brought in Sam Darnold because they don't have to play JJ McCarthy right away. And if he's got the offense down and they feel great about it and he's ready to go, then okay. But Darnold gives you a really good bar to have to clear. So it's not like they draft him and then, hey, this is all on you, kid. We're nobody else there. It's just you and Jaron Hall and Nick Mullins or something. And it kind of reminded me almost with McCarthy of a little bit in hockey when you draft someone who's 18 years old and it's all about what you're going to see from them 2 years from now when they call them up from juniors or something. It's sort of like that with McCarthy, where he's so inexperienced and he is so raw as a quarterback, and he's never had it all put on his shoulders, which we know Kevin O'Connell. If O'Connell would do that with Josh Dobbs, he's going to do it with JJ McCarthy. But I think if O'Connell can help himself and not panic himself when it comes to this, if Darnold throws 4 interceptions, not just be like, all right, throw in the kid. You want to make sure that he's 100% ready to go. And the patience has paid off. But what I think happened over this last number of months is that these guys have earned their stripes as being believed in by the ownership, the way that they've put this all together. So they should be given this patience. It shouldn't be a, well, man, you guys better win next year, or, it's hot seats for you in 2025 or something. This next year should be, it's important to develop JJ McCarthy in the right way and let them do that. Like, from an ownership perspective, from a Vikings fans perspective, you need to let them do that for next year, even if it is not a championship season.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to chew up a potential quarterback or a prospective quarterback right away. And if you ruin their confidence and you ruin their opportunities to develop, and you put the burden of either a playoff run or the future of the franchise or the job security of the front office and the head coach on a 21, 22-year-old kid who's just trying to find his way, that is a recipe for disaster. And I think fans should be prepared. Nobody in Egan is going to mention the word rebuilding. And they're not going to mention competitive rebuild anymore because that's been beaten into the ground. But let's be honest, I don't want to say 2024 would be a lost season, because it's not. Because if you're developing McCarthy and you're kind of reshaping who you are financially and also competitively, there's going to be the potential there for losses, and there's going to be a potential there for pain. What kind of pain? Is it going to be pain that's going to pay off later, like in the weight room? Or is it going to be pain that, is catastrophic and going to put you in the hospital? I'm talking about from a fan's expectation. Go into this season hoping for the best, not bracing for the worst, but sort of expecting somewhere in the middle. And if you can develop McCarthy along the way, if you can get decent production out of Sam Darnold and maybe keep him from losing you games, you may be able to hammer and tong your way to 8 or 9 wins again. That should not be considered a lost season. Now, on the flip side of that, I don't think Justin Jefferson is sitting around going, well, I want to sign for a truckload of money here and wait around for JJ McCarthy to develop. I don't think you're going to have the new guys that they brought in on defense, playmakers that are going to be waiting around for JJ McCarthy to develop. So it's going to be interesting how they frame all this publicly, and then, judge them by their actions more than by their words. But McCarthy is an asset. He's your most valuable asset right now, in addition to Justin Jefferson. And you want these two guys to be, probably Batman and Robin for the next 5 to 6 years. And a lot of that's going to depend on how you handle McCarthy in the next 6 to 9 months than what they could do together in 2 or 3 years. So the burden really shifts on the front office and the coaching staff from winning draft night, at least in their context, seizing the moment, not shrinking away from being aggressive or regretting, as Kwesi was saying last night. I don't want to wake up in the morning regretting that I hung on to a 4th-round pick when I could have had my guy. I think that's going to be interesting to watch. But what I'm really curious about is if and when McCarthy does get an opportunity this year, is it going to be mop-up? Is it going to be Band-Aid work? Or is it going to be development work? A lot of that's going to rest on Sam Darnold. But I would say, just go into this season not thinking playoffs are bust, but thinking playoffs maybe, development hopefully, success further down the road.
And they might end up having a good enough defense to put them in position to compete regularly. They, in my mind, have improved significantly with their defensive roster, despite losing to Danielle Hunter. But there should be
And that takes
expectations.
a lot of burden off a rookie quarterback when you have a solid defense.
It does. And this is the thing about McCarthy, is that we know that football IQ is what everybody praises through the roof with him. And he might be such a football obsessed psycho like the rest of the great quarterbacks that he gets the offense down and he transitions quickly into it. It's not somebody that's coming from, as you said, some crazy spread offense where he's never seen anything like this before. Jim Harbaugh was his coach. So it very well may be that he just wins the job outright and is starting week 1. And then it's really on. I guess I'm just saying that if they have to take time with this, they could still compete for a playoff spot with Sam Darnold. He went 8-9 in Carolina and they were a disaster. I think he's in a much better spot than he was early in his career. It's just that you got to be okay with that. If you're the team, the ownership, the fans, we just have to be all right with the fact that this might take a little while for the better good of JJ McCarthy down the road.
Even if it's not overtly stated that way.
Right. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure that it's going to be quarterback competition from the very start. Give me your feeling now about the excitement level of where we're at Vikings fan wise, because I mean, most exciting thing in Viking land since what, right? It just feels like for a very long time, it's been kind of a slog with some brief moments of like, oh, well, maybe they might. And then they didn't. Right. In 2022, 8 weeks of fun and then reality hits, or, a week of fun in New Orleans where they get a playoff win and then reality hits. It feels like this, if from the Vikings fan base perspective, is the most juiced up they have been really in a very long time.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I think that what we had learned about the Kirk Cousins era is how exhausting it could be. Just from a debate standpoint, evaluating his production, parsing his words. Is he a new Kirk? There's a new version of the old Kirk? Has he won over the locker room? Look he's winning over the fan base now too. And then, he ends up doing what, Cousins the Shark in the negotiating room has done all his career, which is leverage everything he can. And, Atlanta made him an offer he can't refuse. So I think with Cousins' departure and McCarthy's acquisition, I think you can really close the book on the previous regime, the Mike Zimmer era, sort of all of the angst, all of the near misses, and the just kind of really pungent way that whole thing went down toward the end. And I think now it's kind of a brand new day. And I do agree. I think look, they've never drafted a quarterback in the top 10. This is a franchise that's been around for 60 plus years. And you look at the last time they even came that close, Christian Ponder was a disaster. The Teddy Bridgewater era, what may have been, we'll never know. But I feel like this is where it's a young, fresh coach, young, fresh GM, young, fresh quarterback. How is he going to endear himself to the fan base? what are fans going to be excited to watch? They're going to be excited to watch Jordan Addison and JJ Jefferson. They're going to be excited to watch what Aaron Jones is going to bring to the realm. They're going to be excited about what this rebuilt defense is with Brian Flores still there, head coach in waiting. Uh, there are possibilities for them to overachieve, and there are possibilities for them to still be muddling along as they try to find their way. But at least there seems to be a blueprint and a long on ramp here to the future, as opposed to lurching season through exhausting season about what is Cousins going to do, what are they going to do with Cousins, what does this mean for the rest of the locker room, and I got to imagine there must have been some Freudian joy in as much as panic may have set in when the Falcons drafted Michael Penix. I got to imagine there was a little bit of clucking among the Vikings fan base that Cousins is shocked to his lucrative toes as to what's going on with him and what's going to go on with Penix. At the end of the day, he's still going to be counting money the rest of his life. I don't think he's going to be losing too much sleep over all of this, but it is interesting that, fine, Atlanta, you can have the drama of Kirk Cousins now. We're moving on.
And of course, Kirk had to make it clear to everybody how mad he was through his agent and everything else. Couldn't help himself, but to let it be known that he was very upset of what they did. Although he was as shocked as me. I never saw that coming. I thought, because I was doing the live show, I thought that the chat was messing with me. But they were saying, oh, they're drafting Penix. They're drafting Penix. And my TV was 30 seconds behind. And I'm going, no, what? Come on, guys, stop. We don't mess around. This is too important. And no, they actually took Michael Penix. And then their GM said, hey, if he sits for 4 or 5 years, that's great. What, 4 or 5 years is going to be 30.
He's already 20. Yeah, he's already 24, isn't he?
He's going to be 24 at the start of the season. It's an odd thing. With Jordan Love, I believe he was 21 when he was drafted and then waited for 3 years. But, maybe they don't believe in Kirk's Achilles as much as they wanted to say or something. But what a strange
That's a hell of a hedge, man. That's an $180 million hedge.
I have no idea. I mean, I guess the idea is that, you stick with him for 2 years and then you move on, but it didn't make any sense. And everyone was shocked. And once I finished my broadcast, I turned on ESPN and Scott Van Pelt is just like, has no words. It's just, someone explain this to me, and no one could. And I feel most bad for Michael Penix. I mean, this guy should be playing. He's, like you said, he's 24 years old. He's coming off of throwing thousands of college passes. Right. Yeah. I mean, now he's got this like historically strange draft pick hung over his head. Tell me about Detroit, Murph. You were out and about. I mean, it was crazy looking on TV. What were you up to in Detroit last night?
I went, so I got in about noon, and my parents picked me up, came back to their house where I'm actually now in my parents' basement. If you can see our Red Wings Stanley Cup posters here in the background that have been there for forever. We went down to, Nemo's, which is a famous Detroit sports bar on Michigan Avenue, about 3:00. And I knew I was in for something I'd never seen before when all of the super fans that you see on TV all the time with their mohawks and their painted faces and their studs. Think of the black hole in Oakland. I counted at least 4 fan bases represented at this bar at 3:00. The Eagles, the Cowboys, the Dolphins, and the Bills. I just casually talked to some of them, and they had all come in for this. I mean, the draft has now become the traveling roadshow destination that the Super Bowl has always been. And what I found striking was the fact that not only were there 200,000+ people downtown, but they had to turn 100,000 people away at the gates from where the venue was, where Goodell was announcing, because everybody bought these passes. But if you didn't get down there before 4:00 yesterday, it started at 8:00 Eastern, you weren't getting in. They basically said, come back tomorrow, i.e. today, or come back Saturday when no one's going to be there. But I'd never seen that massive humanity in downtown Detroit before. And we're blessed. We got some great weather. It's going to be even nicer weather today, mid-60s and sunny. It's perfect for outside. They really cleaned up the city well. Part of it's a little bit of a Detroit comeback story. I mean, everybody knows the problems with the city in the late 20th century, all the economic downturns. Then they had the bankruptcy when the auto industry failed in 2008, and they had a corrupt mayoral administration and just all the inner city decay for decades, they bottomed out about 15 years ago, and it's been a long run back to respectability. But for the city to be able to bring in that, I never thought of Detroit as a destination town before I did yesterday, and that was quite interesting to see. I mean, I've been gone 24 years. I've never known anybody to ever say, "Hey, let's go to Detroit for a weekend in April." And yet there were hundreds of thousands of people here. And it's gonna eventually make its way to Minneapolis. It's heading to Green Bay, I think, next. Um, it's a party atmosphere. It's a festive atmosphere, and it really is a reminder of how deep the NFL really does have its hooks in us culturally. Because at the end of the day, this is a business meeting, and there's not going to be a single game played in 5 months, and yet there's as much intensity and just sort of joyous fandom for essentially a board meeting. Uh, I don't. There's no other sport that can command attention, command eyeballs, command wallets, and just command interest and passion for what's frankly just a television event. So I was quite impressed. I'm going to go to the Tiger game in a couple hours against the Kansas City Royals. I got my Tigers gear on. We're going to spill out of the ballpark after that, and I think we're going to be a lot closer to the belly of the beast tonight for rounds 2 and 3 than we were last night.
Well, I mean, very cool scene. And I think really just the fact that everybody has so much information now about the players that are coming out. And I
They're all invested.
observed,
As
that's
fans,
right.
everyone's invested.
Because for months there are so many people who create content around the draft. You are given so many different opinions and you form your own throughout, and so many different storylines going into it, that you could feel the gripping tension as the picks are coming off the board. Now, of course, it's super important to the Vikings organization, but I just mean almost any fan base. Unless you were drafting a tackle as Tennessee, you're sitting there, not that that's a bad thing. Offensive line people, don't freak out. It's good to have great tackles, but you know what I mean. It's not a quarterback. And yet,
Right.
as they're coming off the board and you're gripping the table going like, all right, is this going to happen? Are they going to do it? I mean, it was some of the best sports drama. I compared my own feeling just inside to the fourth quarter of a game where, all right, here comes the final drive as they were counting down these picks. When Roma Dunze comes off, it's like, all right, I mean, this tension and energy is really real. And that was, I know, when you pull back and think about it, created from reading a bunch of names who we have no idea what they're going to be. But to get it finally out there after all the buildup and everything, it was a great night for the Minnesota Vikings, for the NFL, for Vikings fans to have. And then we'll see from here what it becomes. So final thoughts, Murph, before you run off to the Tigers game.
I'm going to be interested in what the vibe's going to be like down for rounds 2 and 3, because these are still obviously relevant players that are going to be difference makers on rosters. They may not be as well known, but it's also Friday. The weather's going to be a little bit warmer. So, like I said, we were so far outside the perimeter last night, I felt like I might as well have been in St. Paul watching it on television. Whereas today, I think I'm going to get more of an atmosphere for what the draft means for a city that hosts it, and what that kind of vibe is going to be like, and how many people are actually going to be downtown. Is probably going to be twice as big as it was yesterday. So that's a bit of what I'm looking forward to. And it's to have 6 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks. It was a historic draft. We knew it was going to be a historic draft, but the scheming and the plotting and the maneuvering that kind of took up that second hour, as you mentioned, I mean, it was as good as watching, a 3:30 game on a Sunday afternoon.
I agree. No shame. No shame in feeling that. I agree. That was really something different than any other draft that I have covered since I've been here covering the Vikings, because usually they're drafting 23rd or whatever, and we wait to see if it's a cornerback. So thanks for your time, Murph. I appreciate you jumping in from your parents' basement, giving your reaction, and we'll look forward to your article over at purpleinsider.com as well. Great stuff, Murph. Thanks, man.
All right, great. Have a good day, everyone.